HCR 39. Oh, you need me to hold up?
Hold on, we got a question.
That was 433.
Somebody said 472.
Was the bill, with the bill we just voted on was 433, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
472 was
Yeah, I deferred that
voluntarily
one.
deferred.
Okay.
No, 772 was reported favorably. 472 was voluntarily deferred.
Yes, sir.
All right, and which one we're on now?
This would be HCR 39.
All right. Ms. Lewis, will you read it into the record?
Alrighty, you have HCR 39, Representative Zeringue provides for the continuation of the Judicial Structured Task Force as established by House Resolution Number 30 of the 2022 regular session.
We have no red cards, we have some green cards, and we have one white card whose president would like to speak. And so that's where we stand. Representative Zeringue?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And the intent of the legislation is to continue the task force that was established 2 years ago to work with the judiciary to ensure that we're maximizing available resources and utilization of judges throughout the state, but also utilizing a work point study to address the changes in demographics and need for judges. And I think Representative Bacala has a bill that's even requesting for judges, but there was a moratorium that was placed on the legislature, or imposed, that was approved by the Judicial Council, to look at the need for judges, workload, caseload, and others, and then come back to the legislature, which is our obligation and constitutional authority in terms of appointing judges in addition to funding the judiciary. We tried to do that in the task force. We set it up. Unfortunately, the judges chose not to move forward. But there is, to their credit, as I appreciate it, a willingness and a desire to move that forward. But it would still be important, if the work point study is completed, that the task force is established to continue to utilize the information that's developed from that study to make sure that we as legislators then work with the judiciary to put the proper number of judges, the resources that are there, and making sure we maximize the available resources and utilization throughout the state. And that's what the work point study would do. That's what the task force is set up to do. And this HCR, unlike the previous task force, is going to expand it to include I will amend it. I didn't want to amend it now because I wanted to make sure we can get it through this process before it goes on the floor. I will amend it to include the equal Senate representation and House representation. And I'll be happy to answer any questions.
I've got a few questions. Number one, does this require judges to prepare time slips for their time?
No, sir. The study, and again, it's not my bailiwick. I'm not an attorney, don't even want to be one. But the reality is, this is the National Center. That's what they do. They work with judiciary throughout the United States and working with them to maximize and create efficiencies within the judicial systems. They develop these studies to work with the judges to ensure that based upon their caseload and other factors, that they have sufficient amount of judges and where they need to be. So the intent is not necessarily to put them, and I think that was some of the concern of the judges, that they would then be resorting to time cards and punching in, and that's not the intent. The work point study looks at the amount of time, and that's part of the problem, and all the need to have the study is because of the fact that cases have become more complex. And even though the caseload, which has decreased by 50% over the past couple decades, the workload and caseload has decreased, but the complexity and the time that's spent on those cases have increased. So it's not simply to say, well, how many cases you had. You have to look at both the complexity of the case and the time involved, and that's where the work point study will assist both the judiciary and the legislature to ensure that we do have sufficient representation and judges where they need to be. So
is this something we're paying for?
We did. We set up the money. The legislature appropriated $300,000 to set this up. We've expended about $150,000. There is money available to work with the judges to finish the study if they'd be willing to do that.
Are there other groups that do these same type studies?
There is, and in fact, the legislature, the membership of the legislature recommended another group to look at it because they were cheaper and they could do it quicker, but the judges insisted that this national center, which that's their expertise in working with judges, they insisted that it be this national center to do it. So we relented at the request of the judges to go with their recommendation, which we did. But there are other groups that do this.
Some parishes are lucky enough to have implemented and funded electronic signatures by judges, where they can do a lot of this work, not necessarily at the office, but at a home or wherever. And I worry that if we start requiring punch-ins or time cards or things like that, it's going to be hard to account. Judges get calls all during the night to sign warrants. They do things like that. And I don't think a judge is in a position where we should require him to do time cards.
And, Mr. Chairman, I agree with you 100%. But you know what? That's a red herring by the judges to make sure the study doesn't go forward, because they're saying, oh, they just want us to punch the clock. The study has nothing to do with requiring them to punch clocks. The study, you have to look at the time invested in a particular case to be able to assess the workload. And the number, again, if you base it on filings and whether they're there, I mean, looking at the number of filings and caseload that they have, we'd reduce judges significantly, but that's not the case. This is to look at maximizing the resources that are there and putting the judges in place, because we have some districts, there's no doubt, and there's district judges who are saying, we need help. Hence, you have Representative Bacalak coming up with a bill. But again, we can't fairly assess that until we determine where we need the judges and where are those places where we have significant workloads. We have judges who are working overtime in many places, and we have some districts, quite frankly, that, again, they get upset when I say this, but they have a great golf game because they just don't spend time in the district because the workload's not there. So that work point study will help us as legislators, which it is our responsibility to determine, to place judges and get judges where they need to be, the information that we need to assist the judiciary to get the judges in place.
My judicial district was lucky enough to get one of the 2 new judges approved by the Judicial Council. My question is, what statistics or what did they look at in approving these 2 judges different from what the work point study would do as to the addition of new judges?
And that's a darn good question, because we don't really know. We don't have sufficient amount of information to determine if, in fact, we could simply add a judge or maybe reallocate some resources to assist certain districts with existing judges that may not have the same workload, which does not cause an increase to the taxpayers or to the judiciary, which are in desperate need for money to improve technology and other things that we need, CASA, drug courts, money that could be going to those important efforts. We may not need judges in certain districts. So you raise an interesting point. What do they base it on? Well, they base it on because of the fact that my workload is increasing, I need another judge. Well, maybe we could look at it overall and reallocate and reassess what the resources we do have and place them where they need to be. And that's why the moratorium was in place, to ensure that we look at and we fairly and objectively assess the need, and that's what the work point study would do, to determine that, and not just simply ask. If you look at what the council has done, and that's part of the problem, the council will tell you that, and it's not about, they'll also say, well, you just want to remove judges. That's not the point. It's not to remove judges, it's the allocation of resources. And the Judicial Council, as I appreciate it, or the legislature, has never not approved a judge. I mean, it's just a one-way escalator. We can always say
I don't think that's correct, because I do know that the 21st Judicial District put in for 2 judges, but they only got
after the
approved for
moratorium.
1.
But I think part of the moratorium had something to do with that. I think the problem is we've always either approved. We've never taken a judge and said that maybe we need to look at reallocating some resources someplace else. It's always adding. It's not like how we can reassess where the needs are, and that's what the study would do.
All right, we got a good many questions. Representative Wiley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Is there a,
I have this right.
wait a minute,
So this,
hold on. All right, you good now.
this task force, sunset, it ran out of time, and you want to reestablish? What happened, and why are we here today?
Well, we're here today because the intent there was agreement on, for the most part of everyone, to move this effort forward. Previous legislators in 2011 and 2018 identified the need to do a work point study so we could look at making sure and allocating the resources for the judiciary. Previous legislators have agreed to. They've conducted a work point study, but it was a study that was just based, it wasn't an objective study. It was simply just looking at references, taking information from some of the judges. It wasn't necessarily to the depth and degree that we're talking about here. And we set this task force up. Everyone agreed we would move forward, but at the 11th hour, the judges decided, well, we don't want to do this anymore. They backed out. So the purpose of the task force was to do that. They weren't participating in the study, so there was no need. Essentially, it would sunset. So this is just to reconstitute and ensure that the task force is in place. If the judiciary chooses to continue the study, which I'd hope that they would do, would continue to work with them to make sure that from the legislative perspective, implementing our constitutional responsibility and working with the legislature to move those recommendations from the study forward.
Is there a concurrent committee of the judges? Am I hearing this correctly?
Whoa.
There's judges who
Hold on.
participate.
Some little mouse turned it off.
Oh. All right, is there a judicial, not this one, of judges, I may be wrong on this, I was told this morning, or it was suggested, that there's a concurrent committee made up of judges or judges designated that are trying to accomplish the same goal?
Well, within the judiciary, there is a committee that looks at and assesses the need for judges. And they have members here. If you'd like, you can ask them as well. But that's their purpose, to work with the judiciary to determine the need for, and they assess that. And it was that same council that put a moratorium based upon the need to look at assessing where the resources are and said, we won't add any additional judges until we can determine and utilize the study to see what resources we actually need.
Last question.
That was 2 years ago. This past year, I think in this recent year, they've despite the moratorium, recommended that 2 judges be appointed. I think that's what Representative Bacalau's bill was.
Thank you. The last question. What prompted the judges, I guess collectively, to not want to move forward on this task force at the 11th hour, as you say?
Sure, I'd be more than happy to share the final report, because as part of the task force responsibility, we came up with a report. And in the report, I'll be more than happy to share with you, but essentially it came down to the fact that, to paraphrase, the judges didn't necessarily trust the legislature. They don't think the legislature should have been conducting that. The judges think they should do it themselves. And that was pretty much the rationalization as to why they didn't want to participate.
Well, as I said here, and I don't know if the shoe fits, but I'm going to go ahead and suggest or at least offer that the judges do know more than me as a Judiciary Committee member on what it is. And I get the larger picture, which is apparently there's a great concern, and I think I join in that concern, that there are judges who do a lot and judges who don't do a lot. And is that a simple conclusion? And I'm talking about workload, and defining what the workload is kind of catchy, right? Because some cases are much more convoluted than others, et cetera. Who would know that better than judges? I'm not their advocate. I'm engaging in that conversation, asking that question.
I'm not suggesting that we determine that. What I'm suggesting is that we utilize this study to do our legislative obligation and responsibility to work with the judges if there's a recommendation to ensure that those resources are allocated. And so we do have judges. It's not like they didn't participate. Judges do and are part of the task force in making those recommendations.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Representative Landry.
Rep. Zeringue, I was on your committee for the last couple of years, on the task force committee, and the judges just refused to do this. Is that right?
For the most part, yes.
Yeah, I thought I was extremely unprofessional as a fellow lawyer. Who pays the judges' salaries, at least in part?
The public's general.
The legislature?
Yes, the legislature establishes
Who appropriates
the budget.
it?
We appropriate it, yes.
I don't know the answer to this, but what about their clerks?
The staff, yes. For appellate and Supreme District, we pay salaries for judges. I think a lot of it is local as well. There's local participation with district, but primarily appellate and Supreme, it's funded by the State General Fund.
Okay, and are there any limits on how many clerks they have, at least from us?
I don't know of any limits. I think they establish their budget and their need. We don't put a limit on it.
Okay, thanks. And judges get pensions after 10 years, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. And the courts in the state, I know there's a lot of local fees and fines that pay for that, but would you say the majority of court expenses are appropriated by the legislature?
For appellate, supreme, and district, yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Not city.
Representative Hughes. All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Zeringue, thank you for your continued work. Obviously, like Representative Landry, I've had the honor of serving on the Judicial Structure Task Force for the past couple of years, and hopefully look forward to continuing to serve on that as we continue this important work. From my standpoint, I just think we have to clarify. I think in theory, everybody, in fairness, wanted to do the study. I don't think it was a matter of the judges just not wanting to do the study, but I think they wanted some comfort that we were not just going to look at the number of case filings, but we needed to take into account complexity of cases. And I'm not an attorney, but I would assume that a complex asbestos case, for example, if a judge had a case like that, the amount of time, it may not look like a judge has a lot of cases, but obviously, some cases are more complex than others. With that said, I think it's my understanding that the Supreme Court is now going to require that this work point study takes place, and it's my understanding that the judges have agreed to participate, but it's not going to be optional. So I think we're going to see some progress, moving forward on this, and we'll be able to move forward.
I hope so.
Thank you, Chairman.
All right. Representative Edmondson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Zeringue, I'm a little confused. I'm hearing a lot of entities, and I can get with you offline. I'm not going to take a lot of time, but I'm hearing that there's a workforce study. Okay.
There's a study that we established, but there is a center that does this. And so we've accumulated a lot of the information that can be used. So the judges can take what was established by the task force and build on and use that, which would reduce the overall cost and make it.
Is the task force what you're calling the workforce study?
No, ma'am.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Through the task force.
Okay, let's do the workforce study. So tell me about, that's $300,000 you mentioned. Is that to have to do with the workforce study?
And it's not, I'm sorry, and maybe I'm mispronouncing it wrong. It's a work point study, but it's basically to look at the cases. The task force was utilizing the National Center that does this for a living. They are professionals. They do this across the United States, and that's why, to Representative Wiley's point, we're not in a position to judge.
Okay.
The judges are.
That's why we have an outside entity doing that.
Yes, purely objective, professional, and that's what they do across the United States.
Thank you. The Judicial Council, the Judicial, so the Judicial Council, what is that?
Well, that is within the judicial branch. Again, the three independent branches of government. And that's where, there's often cited the judicial independence and legislator, and we're in no way trying to affect or engage in what is the responsibility of the judiciary.
Okay, because it a little bit sounds like that just from somebody that doesn't understand, and so I just wanted you to say that. Okay, and the Committee of Judges, that's another entity.
Committee of Judges.
Yeah, I thought I heard you say there's a Committee of Judges.
Well, within the Judicial Council,
Wiley
that
was saying
judges that are part of the Judicial Council.
Oh, but that's part of the council.
Yes, ma'am.
The Committee of Judges.
Well, it's not a committee of judges, but they determine the judges, or there may be a district who requests, the need for a judge, it would
Okay.
go before the Judicial Council to assess that and make that
Okay.
recommendation.
Okay, so tell me the makeup of the Judicial Council, and that's going to be my last question.
Well, I think there was an email that came through. There was a question
was
at
sent to
last
all of
month's
us.
meeting. It was sent
I
out.
think it was sent to all of us.
Okay, I'll
You
take your
should
part
have
for
that.
not seeing it. Okay.
We
So-
do have a member on there, Representative Muscarella.
Yeah.
Okay, good. But is there anyone outside of, is there any just plain person on there? Just judges, attorneys, representatives from the Senate and the House? Is that it?
There's House and Senate, and they do have attorneys.
Okay,
They do
and
have
judges.
district attorneys. They do have judges.
Yeah.
They have different, again, that's the council within the judiciary. We don't set that up.
Right. Oh, okay, we don't set that up. Okay, that's what I wanted to know. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Zeringue.
You're welcome.
Representative Zeringue, we have no more questions. I do have Ms. Sonola Vujanovic, who would like to speak. And Ms. Catherine Diamond. All right. Ms. Vujanovic, you want to speak first?
Thank you, Representative Carter. My name is Sandra Vunovich, and I am the Judicial Administrator at the Louisiana Supreme Court. As a judicial administrator, I was involved in the Judicial Structure Task Force, and I wanted to come up and update y'all on what happened after the task force was disbanded as far as the work point study. But before I do that, I'd like to give you a little background on this Judicial Council, new judgeship committee, and all that to kind of help y'all understand. Before the task force was created, there was a system in place by law under which when a judicial district court had a request for a new judgeship, or a legislator from that district said, my judges need a new judgeship, they would file an application for a new judgeship with the Judicial Council. That would be referred to the new judgeship committee for review. And what would be reviewed would be the caseload filing data and other information, but would be analyzed using what was called a work point formula. A formula was developed whereby cases were weighted, and this was a formula that was developed by Dr. Hugh Collins, who was one of my predecessors and had been in existence for years. Well, the legislature asked the Supreme Court to do a study that was called the HCR 143 study in the early 2000s, which found that work point formula had become outdated because the formula wasn't taking into account all the new demands that were being put on judges. Judges were now presiding over specialty court dockets, drug court dockets, the increase in self-represented litigants before them, advances in technology. So the National Center for State Courts said, you know what, your work point formula is outdated. It needs to be updated and the way we would update it would be to do a weighted caseload study. So several years ago, with this acknowledgement that the formula was invalid, the Judicial Council put a moratorium on the request for new judgeships, saying it's not fair to evaluate these requests using an invalid formula. We've got to get this formula updated. So the Supreme Court asked the National Center for Proposal to update the formula, and it came back in the hundreds of thousands, and the Supreme Court said, well, we're not going to proceed at this point because we don't have the funds to do that. So against that background, then, the task force was established in 2022 for the purposes that Representative Zeringue stated. And as part of that task force, they said, well, we'll go ahead and have the legislature pay to have this weighted caseload study done. And that's when the task force looked at proposals between the National Center for State Courts and another group, and then chose the National Center to proceed. So the task force continued its work, and one of the elements that had become best practices, according to the National Center, was to evaluate how much time judges spent on particular activities, how much time a judge spent reviewing a pleading, having a pretrial conference, sitting in trial, doing these things. And to evaluate that, you needed to know how much time judges were spending on these activities, i.e., a judge would need to do a timesheet for a limited amount of time so that the National Center could take all the data, aggregate it, and say, this is how much time we think judges should be spending on these particular activities. Well, some questions arose about these time logs, and would they be confidential or would they be public record? There was concerns that perhaps, if these time logs got out into the public realm, could they be used for political purposes? Could they be misunderstood? Could they reveal the deliberative process? And so the judges started to express concerns, and there were ideas floated about this was the first time that the legislature was charged with doing or directing the study. All these other times, the studies had been really directed by the courts in all these other states. And states all over the country have done these time studies. So that brings us up to the task force disbands because judges don't want to participate in this study because they're unsure. And I don't want to speak for the judges, but my understanding is that they had several concerns, and they actually sent their concerns to the Supreme Court and said, if you address our concerns, we're willing to participate in the study. So task force disbands in November. A few weeks later, I contact, as judicial administrator, the National Center for State Courts and say, how can we move forward? Can you give me a proposal that if the Supreme Court says we're going to undertake the study, let me know how much it would cost. Do we get any, can we get any credit for the money that was already spent on the front end of the study? So the National Center worked up a proposal, said, but we're not going to be able to do it right away, but we can work on it. Now, at that time, we only asked for a proposal for the district courts. Meanwhile, I started hearing from judges that, this isn't really fair that we can't move forward with our request for new judgeships. We're willing to go ahead and do this study, but if it could be done under the authority of the Supreme Court with some protection over what our time logs are, or at least clarification on what they could or could not be used for. So at the last Judicial Council meeting, which Representative Edmondson asked about, I think, the composition of the Judicial Council. That does have lay people on it as well, lay people, DAs, judges, whatever. At that council meeting, Shannon Gremion, a Third Circuit Court of Appeal judge, and the president of the District Judges Association, Lala Sylvester, actually made a motion urging requesting the Supreme Court to undertake the study or have the study conducted under the purview of the Supreme Court. So where we are now is I just asked the National Center to give me an updated proposal on a Court of Appeal study because they were doing them two different studies. The task force had decided to segregate those studies, but the Supreme Court is considering the concerns of the district judges, and they have directed me to get them some more information so that they can decide whether they want to, in fact, order that a study be conducted. They have been, like I said, contacted by judges who've expressed a willingness to move forward with the study. So the bottom line is that regardless of the task force, I need, for my purposes as judicial administrator, an updated work point formula that we can apply to these requests for new judgeships, because I got district courts out there that really need new judges. A question came up about if there's a moratorium in place, how could the 21st go forward at the Judicial Council? And actually, that kind of demonstrated the problems with the work point formula, because they ended up using an old work point formula to get us to a threshold, and then once that threshold was reached, then a site visit was done, and at the end of the day, the new judgeship committee recommended going forward with one judgeship at the 21st. So bottom line is to let you know the work point study, as far as we're concerned at the Supreme Court and the Judicial Administrator's Office, is not dead. We are working towards moving forward on getting it done under the auspices of the Supreme Court. and I'm happy to answer any questions.
And Mr. Chairman, if I may, to add, and I appreciate Ms. Sandra and all the work that they did on help on the task force. And just to clarify another point, there were concerns raised by the judges within the task force about the study. But I know Representative Landry, Representative Hughes, and Representative Mascarello could attest that we went to great lengths with the National Academy to address those concerns, and for the most part did. And despite that, it was determined not to move forward. But I wanted the members to know that we went to great lengths to meet the concerns or address the concerns that the judges had about moving forward to the study, and it still didn't proceed.
I'm just going to, for the record, read the cards. Laurie Adams, Pelican Institute, President in support. Guy Cormier, President in support. Lauren Haddon, Lobby, President in support. And Ms. Catherine Diamond, you wish to speak?
Yes, sir. I'm actually, my name is Catherine Diamond, and I'm actually experiencing a horrific situation, East Baton Rouge Parish Family Court. I've been in constant litigation for 7 years, and on Monday, it will be 27 months since I've been allowed to see my children. I'm experiencing an absolutely egregious situation where I've been, had so many irregularities, and I've found, in my opinion, that there's very
Ms. Diamond, the problem is we're only discussing this bill right now, and we
I know.
can't take in particular cases.
I'm sorry. I was trying to express that there are issues in the courts, and I was using my personal experience as an example, but my difficulties are not unique. I believe that the legislature needs to be involved in the oversight and transparency of the judiciary, and I think that y'all need to observe their methodologies and the amount of time that they're spending with their cases, the way they're being handled. I know that my case has not been handled professionally. Also whenever I try to make complaints about this, I learned that the Judiciary Commission has no way of learning of possible misconduct unless a complaint is filed. So, I believe that this needs to be studied. I don't know of any regulatory procedures with the judiciary, and there's so much power and money, and it's just your laws affect citizens in so many ways. Your entire life is at stake when you walk into a courtroom. So I think that, having an outside entity besides the judiciary review their methodology and their way they do things, the time they put into it. And I do think it's important as a voter that I know who is treating their judiciary position as a true profession and does overtime and works hard. I graduated from LSU in architecture, and I spend many all-nighters working for my clients to make sure I do the best job that I can. And I want to know that my judges who have my life in their hands and my children's lives in their hands are doing the same. I want transparency. I want accountability. And whenever they fail, I want them to be replaced. And if they're overworked and they can't, do a professional and thorough job, I want them to have more support. I want more judges if they need it. I want my life to be handled responsibly. I want my children's lives to be handled responsibly.
All right, thank you. Representative Edmondson, you have a question?
Yes, just one quick question. Is there a cost to the task force?
Cost to the task force, other than we've allocated appropriated dollars to do the study.
Okay, and who does the study?
It would be the National Center
That's the outside people?
Yes, ma'am.
How much is that cost?
Well, we had negotiated a contract to do it for $300,000. They've utilized about $100,000, $150,000.
And you're trying to get them to use the other 150 and complete that? Is that what you said, ma'am?
Well, I would be delighted if the legislature
Sure, the
was
judges
willing
would,
to allocate the funds for that, or the Supreme Court would have to come
Well,
up with the
wait,
funds.
there's $150,000 left over.
Well, exactly, and that's been allocated. But that was allocated under a study that would be done under the auspices of the task force and not under the Supreme Court. So that would
Can't you just borrow that 150 and use it for that?
I think my justices would love that idea, but that would be up to Representative Zeringue, I would think, to whether we could do an MOU under, that the money would be allocated under, these provisions.
Yeah.
we talk about.
Rather than trying to get another sum of money, I don't know, I'm just saying.
Well, and that's why the WorkPoint study hadn't been updated since 2014, is that
Get
the
it.
Supreme Court didn't have those funds available to do the study.
And I'd be more than willing to amend the budget to reallocate those dollars to assist the judges to do that, if it's available and if that's the wishes of the
I mean, that
legislature.
sounds like a reasonable option, doesn't it?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Thank you,
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
All right, Representative Galley. You wave?
Yes, sir.
All right. The board is clear. Do I have a motion? Representative Edmondson has moved favorable on Representative Zeringue's House concurrent resolution. Is there any objections? All right. Objection by Representative Jordan. With the vote, yes would be to move the bill forward favorably. A vote no is to not move favorable. All right. Madam Secretary, will you call the roll?
Representative Breaux?
Yes.
Yes. Representative Brown? No. Representative Chenevert? Yes. Representative Dickerson? Yes. Representative Edmonston? Yes. Representative Galley?
Yes.
Yes. Representative Green?
No.
No. Representative Hebert? Representative Hughes?
Yes.
Yes. Representative Jordan? No. Representative Lacombe? No. Representative LaFleur? No. Representative Landry? Representative Mack?
Yes.
Yes. Representative Ogeron? Representative Ventrella? Okay. Representative Landry? Yes. Representative Ogeron?
Yes.
Yes. Representative Ventrella? Representative Wiley?
Yes.
Yes. Representative Zeringue?
Yes.
Yes.
Don't call me. What is the vote?
11 yeas, 5 nays.
What is it?
11 yeas, 5 nays.
And that bill is reported favorably.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members.